What happens when country music royalty meets daytime television controversy? Well, you're about to find out, because what went down between Reba McEntire and Whoopi Goldberg on The View has everyone talking. This heated exchange escalated so quickly that security had to get involved. And by the end, one of country music's biggest legends was escorted right off that stage. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you won't believe how this all unfolded. The tension was palpable from the moment Reba McEntire walked onto The View set. She'd been invited to discuss her new tours and recent philanthropic work, but something felt different today. The usual warm welcome seemed strained, and you could sense the underlying current of unresolved issues brewing beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg started off seemingly cordial enough. "Welcome back to The View, Reba. It's always good to have you here," she said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I understand you've got some exciting projects coming up." Reba nodded, settling into her chair with that characteristic grace she's known for. "Thank you for having me, Whoopi. Yes, the tour is going wonderfully, and I'm really excited about the charitable foundation we've expanded into rural communities." "That's wonderful," Whoopi replied. But there was something in her tone that suggested she had other plans for this interview. Speaking of rural communities, there's been a lot of talk lately about country music's role in, shall we say, certain political climates. The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the direction they'd discussed during the pre-show meeting. Reba's publicist, watching from the wings, felt her stomach drop. Reba raised an eyebrow, maintaining her composure. "I'm not sure I follow, Whoopi. My foundation focuses on education and health care access. Politics doesn't really enter into helping children get books or making sure families have medical care." "Oh, but doesn't it, though?" Whoopi leaned forward, her voice taking on that sharp edge viewers had come to recognize when she was about to make a point. "I mean, when you're performing in certain venues for certain audiences, aren't you kind of endorsing a particular viewpoint by association?" The studio audience grew quiet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. This wasn't the lighthearted celebrity interview they'd expected to witness. Reba's jaw tightened slightly, though she kept her voice level. "Whoopi, I perform for anyone who wants to hear music. I don't screen my audiences based on their personal beliefs. And I certainly don't think it's appropriate to suggest that I'm responsible for every individual person's political opinions just because they buy a ticket to my show." "But surely you understand the influence you have," Whoopi pressed on, ignoring the warning looks from her co-hosts. "Country music has become synonymous with certain ideologies. And when someone of your stature doesn't speak out against harmful rhetoric, isn't that a form of complicity?" The word complicity hung in the air like a challenge. Reba's eyes flashed, and for the first time since sitting down, her famous composure began to crack. "Complicity," Reba repeated, her voice rising just a notch. "Whoopi, I've spent my entire career bringing people together through music. I've supported causes across the political spectrum because I believe in helping people, not dividing them." Whoopi wasn't backing down. "Entertainment has always been political, Reba. Every choice is political. The venues you choose, the songs you sing, the causes you support, they all send messages. And right now, silence in the face of extremism is complicity." "Extremism?" Reba's voice was sharper now. "Who are you to decide what constitutes extremism? Last I checked, believing in traditional values, supporting your community, and wanting to keep families together weren't extremist positions." "Traditional values?" Whoopi scoffed. "Let's talk about what that phrase really means, shall we? Because when people talk about traditional values, they're usually talking about keeping certain groups in their place." The audience was completely silent now. The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to intervene, but neither woman was giving them an opening. Reba leaned forward, her blue eyes blazing. "That's exactly the problem, Whoopi. You're so busy putting people in boxes and assigning motivations to them that you can't see past your own assumptions. When I talk about traditional values, I'm talking about hard work, respect for others, taking care of your family and your neighbors." "My prejudices?" Whoopi's voice rose sharply. "I'm not the one who's been silent while marginalized communities are under attack. I'm not the one who performs for crowds waving Confederate flags and pretends not to see them." "Now hold on just 1 minute." Reba stood up from her chair, her voice carrying that authoritative tone that had commanded stages for decades. "You don't get to stand there and accuse me of supporting hate when you don't know anything about what I've done or who I've helped. I've been fighting for equality and opportunity long before it was trendy, and I didn't need to make a public spectacle of it to prove my worth. The studio was electric with tension. Whoopi stood as well. The two women now faced each other across the table like opponents in a heavyweight bout. Fighting for equality? Whoopi's laugh was harsh. Where was this fighting when voting rights were under attack? When women's reproductive rights were being stripped away? When LGBTQ+ youth were being targeted? Your silence spoke volumes, Reba. My silence? Reba's voice was incredulous. Who says I was silent? Just because I didn't tweet about every political issue or use award shows as my personal soapbox doesn't mean I wasn't working behind the scenes. When you have a platform like yours, privacy is a luxury you can't afford, Whoopi shot back. People look up to you. They listen to you. And when you stay quiet on important issues, you're telling them that those issues don't matter. Reba shook her head, her red hair catching the studio lights. No, Whoopi. What I'm telling them is that their entertainment doesn't have to come with a political sermon attached. What I'm telling them is that they can enjoy music without having someone else's agenda shoved down their throats. But clearly, that's not something you understand. The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point, and everyone could feel it. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented confrontation between two entertainment legends. What I understand, Whoopi continued, her voice cutting through the thick tension, is that when good people stay silent, bad things happen. And right now, your fan base includes some very vocal supporters of policies that hurt real people. Reba's hands clenched at her sides. So now you're holding me responsible for every person who's ever bought my album? That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of controversy and division. At least my fans don't spend their time attacking people who think differently than they do. Attacking people? Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. I'm holding people accountable. There's a difference. Though I don't expect you to understand that from your ivory tower in Nashville. Ivory tower? Reba laughed, but there was no humor in it. Whoopi, I grew up on a cattle ranch in Oklahoma. I know what it's like to work with your hands, to struggle to make ends meet, to worry about whether there'll be enough money to keep the lights on. Don't you dare talk to me about ivory towers when you've been sitting at this table making millions of dollars telling other people how to think. The other co-hosts finally tried to intervene. Ladies, maybe we should take a breath here, one of them suggested. But both women ignored the attempt at mediation. Whoopi stepped closer to the table. At least I use my platform to speak truth to power instead of hiding behind some false notion of neutrality. Neutrality in the face of oppression is choosing the side of the oppressor. There you go again, Reba fired back, with your assumptions and your labels. You think anyone who doesn't march in lockstep with your particular brand of activism is automatically an oppressor? That kind of thinking is exactly what's wrong with this country right now. You've decided that anyone who doesn't agree with you 100% is the enemy. When people's basic human rights are on the line, there is no middle ground, Whoopi declared, her voice rising. You can't be a little bit pregnant, and you can't be a little bit supportive of equality. Reba shook her head vigorously. That's where you're wrong, Whoopi. Real change happens when people find common ground, when they work together despite their differences. But you'd rather divide people into camps and declare war than actually solve problems. Common ground. Whoopi's voice dripped with skepticism. What common ground is there with people who want to roll back civil rights? What common ground is there with people who think some Americans deserve fewer rights than others? See, there you go again, Reba pointed at Whoopi, her voice growing more heated. You're putting words in people's mouths, assigning beliefs to them they never expressed. Most of the people you're so quick to demonize just want to live their lives, raise their families, and be left alone. But apparently that makes them villains in your worldview. Living your life and being left alone is a privilege not everyone gets to enjoy. Whoopi shot back. Some people have to fight just for the right to exist safely in this country. And you think alienating half the population is going to help them? Reba's voice was incredulous. You think calling people names and dismissing their concerns is going to build the kind of coalition you need to actually protect vulnerable communities? All you're doing is pushing people further apart. Whoopi slammed her hand on the table, causing the water glasses to jump. I'm not here to coddle people's feelings when lives are at stake. If they can't handle being called out for supporting harmful policies, maybe they need to examine why those policies appeal to them in the first place. Harmful policies? Reba repeated, her voice heavy with frustration. According to who? According to you? According to this table? You've appointed yourselves the arbiters of right and wrong. And anyone who questions your judgment gets labeled and dismissed. Some things are right and some things are wrong, Reba. It's not complicated, Whoopi declared. Human dignity isn't a matter of opinion. Nobody's arguing against human dignity, Reba replied, her voice rising to match Whoopi's intensity. But you don't get to define what that means for everyone else. You don't get to decide that your interpretation of complex issues is the only valid one. When those complex issues involve whether certain groups of people deserve equal treatment under the law, yes, I do get to have strong opinions about that, Whoopi fired back. Reba threw her hands up in exasperation. And there it is again. You're so convinced of your own moral superiority that you can't even conceive that reasonable people might disagree with your methods, even if they share your goals. Methods. Whoopi's voice was getting louder now, causing some audience members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. What methods would you prefer, Reba? Should we ask nicely for equal rights? Should we say please when we demand that people be treated with basic human decency? How about starting with not assuming the worst about everyone who doesn't think exactly like you do? Reba's voice matched Whoopi's volume now, the two women facing off like boxers in the ring. How about recognizing that most people, regardless of their political beliefs, want the same basic things: safety, opportunity, and respect? Respect. Whoopi laughed bitterly. Tell that to the families being torn apart by immigration policies. Tell that to the women who can't access health care. Tell that to the kids who can't be themselves at school without fear. Where's their respect? Reba's face flushed red, her famous temper now fully unleashed. You want to talk about families being torn apart? Let's talk about how your brand of politics has divided this country so badly that people can't even sit down for Thanksgiving dinner without a fight breaking out. Let's talk about how your constant attacks and accusations have made it impossible for people to have civil conversations about difficult topics. Civil conversations? Whoopi was practically shouting now. There's nothing civil about policies that dehumanize people based on who they love, or where they were born, or what they look like. And there's nothing productive about demonizing half the country because they don't agree with your solutions to those problems. Reba shouted back, her voice carrying across the studio. You've created an environment where anyone who questions your approach gets attacked, labeled, and silenced. That's not fighting for justice. That's authoritarianism with a smile. The word authoritarianism seemed to hit Whoopi like a physical blow. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, the studio fell into complete silence. The audience held their collective breath, sensing that something significant had just happened. You just call me an authoritarian? Whoopi's voice was dangerously quiet now, more menacing than when she'd been shouting. Reba didn't back down. If the shoe fits, Whoopi. You've decided that your way of thinking is the only acceptable way, and anyone who disagrees with you is not just wrong, but evil. That sounds pretty authoritarian to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the production crew seemed frozen, unsure of how to handle this unprecedented situation. The two women stared at each other across the table, both breathing heavily, both clearly past the point of no return. Whoopi's face contorted with rage, her composure completely shattered. You want to see authoritarian? I'll show you authoritarian. This is my show, my table, and I don't have to sit here and listen to some Nashville princess lecture me about politics while she profits off the very people who are trying to drag this country backward. Your show. Reba's voice was ice-cold now, more dangerous than when she'd been shouting. Last I checked, this was supposed to be a place for different viewpoints, not your personal propaganda platform. But I guess that was just marketing, wasn't it? The other co-hosts were frantically trying to signal the producers, but the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. Whoopi stood up, leaning across the table toward Reba. You know what your problem is, Reba? You think you can play both sides. You think you can take money from people who want to hurt others, and then claim you're neutral. Well, neutrality is a luxury we can't afford anymore. And you know what your problem is? Reba stood as well, matching Whoopi's aggressive posture. You've become so drunk on your own self-righteousness that you can't see how you're destroying the very causes you claim to care about. You're not building bridges, you're burning them. Some bridges deserve to be burned, Whoopi snarled. Some people don't deserve a seat at the table. Listen to yourself, Reba said, her voice filled with disgust. You're talking about excluding people from the conversation because they don't think like you do. That's not democracy, that's fascism. The word fascism landed like a bomb in the studio. Several audience members gasped audibly, and the tension became almost unbearable. Did you just call me a fascist? On my own show? I called your behavior fascist. Yes, Reba replied without flinching. And if that hurts your feelings, maybe you should examine why it fits so well. That's it, Whoopi declared, her voice carrying across the entire studio. I've had enough of this. Security. The audience erupted in murmurs and gasps as Whoopi actually called for security. This had gone far beyond a heated debate into something unprecedented in daytime television history. Reba laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. Of course, when you can't win the argument, you silence the opposition. How perfectly on brand for you, Whoopi. I don't have to argue with someone who comes on my show and insults me. Whoopi shot back, her voice shaking with rage. This is supposed to be a place of respect and dignity. Respect and dignity? Reba's voice was incredulous. You've spent the last 20 minutes attacking me, my fans, and everything I stand for. And now you want to talk about respect? You started this fight, Whoopi. But you don't get to control how it ends. 2 security guards had appeared at the edge of the set, looking uncertain about what exactly they were supposed to do. The situation was clearly unprecedented for everyone involved. One of the co-hosts finally found her voice. Ladies, please, can we just take a step back here? No, Whoopi said firmly, pointing at Reba. She needs to leave now. Reba shook her head in amazement. This is incredible. You invite someone on your show, attack them for their beliefs, and then have them removed when they defend themselves. This is exactly what's wrong with discourse in this country. What's wrong with discourse, Whoopi replied, her voice dripping with venom, is people like you who pretend to be above it all while quietly supporting the people who want to take us backward. People like me? Reba's voice rose again. You mean people who actually try to bring communities together instead of tearing them apart? People who believe in finding solutions instead of just pointing fingers? Yeah, what a terrible person I must be. The security guards were now closer, clearly getting instructions through their earpieces. The entire studio felt like a powder keg ready to explode. You want to unite people behind bad ideas, Whoopi accused. That's not unity. That's complicity in harm. And you want to divide people into teams and declare war on anyone who won't join yours, Reba fired back. That's not progress. That's destruction. Ma'am, one of the security guards said quietly to Reba, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. Reba looked at the security guard, then back at Whoopi, her expression a mixture of disgust and disappointment. Unbelievable. This is what your version of tolerance looks like. This is what your version of inclusion looks like. Anyone who challenges your worldview gets silenced and removed. You challenged more than my worldview, Whoopi said, her voice still shaking with anger. You challenged my character, my integrity, and my right to speak truth to power. I challenged your methods and your assumptions, Reba corrected, gathering her purse as the security guards waited patiently. But apparently in your world, that's the same thing as a personal attack. The entire studio watched in stunned silence as one of country music's biggest stars prepared to be escorted off the set of one of daytime television's most popular shows. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Reba said, turning back to face Whoopi one last time. We probably agree on more than we disagree on. We both care about people. We both want to make the world better. We both believe in justice and fairness. But you're so committed to your way being the only way that you can't see past your own anger to find that common ground. Common ground with someone who just called me a fascist. Whoopi shook her head. I don't think so. Then you've proven my point perfectly. Reba replied sadly. You'd rather hold on to your anger than actually solve problems. You'd rather be right than be effective. As the security guards gently but firmly began to escort Reba toward the exit, she turned back one final time. Good luck building the world you want with tactics like these. Whoopi, I hope it works out better than you think it will. The cameras continued rolling as Reba McEntire, one of the most respected figures in country music, was escorted off the View set, leaving behind a stunned studio audience and a host who looked like she'd just been through a tornado. Whoopi stood at the table, breathing heavily, watching until Reba disappeared from view. The other co-hosts sat in shocked silence, unsure of how to proceed. The audience remained quiet, processing what they'd just witnessed. Finally, Whoopi turned back to the cameras, her composure slowly returning, but her voice still carrying traces of the storm that had just passed. Well, that was certainly unexpected, she said, attempting to regain some semblance of normalcy. Sometimes these conversations get heated when important issues are at stake. But everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented, something that would be talked about and analyzed for years to come. A line had been crossed, bridges had been burned, and there would be no going back from what had just transpired on live television. So there you have it, folks. One of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history, ending with a country music legend being escorted off the set after a heated battle over politics, principles, and the very nature of discourse in America. What did you think about this incredible showdown? Do you think Whoopi was right to have Reba removed, or did she go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this.